All right, we are live. I am really excited about this interview. For those of you watching and you're trying to figure out what's Odell, I've been doing all these interviews to try to get to this interview. This is one he doesn't even know. Grant Baldwin, if you don't know who Grant is, like everybody that I've been interviewing, he's Googleable. But you can check out thespeakerlab.com. And I'm not going to read an official bio, official intro for Grant. I've known Grant as a speaker, been in that world for probably 4 or 5 years. First heard about you, Grant, from a mutual friend of ours, a real Moody.
Yeah, he's a legend.
Yeah, he's a great dude. And Grant was primarily, and if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong. They were primarily like in the youth space.
Yeah,
dominated the youth space. A good friend of ours, Kyle Sheely. Also has a lot of great things to say about you. But Grant is one of those people, you all, that studied his craft. I posted today, it's like, if you want to be an expert in something, you study, you research your craft. And Grant has been able to turn his making millions of dollars on stage to being able to do that off stage, which is something that I think a lot of speakers desire to do, but don't really know how to do it. And so I am just blessed and fortunate to have Grant here. Grant, how you doing? How you living, sir?
Doing well, man. It's weird, unique times in the world and in the speaking industry, but the sun came up again today, and there's a good chance it's going to come up again tomorrow. So all is well in the world.
Love it. And since my good friend Jasmine just mentioned your book,
nice. Come on now.
I got to know.
There we go.
And one thing that I love, when we met in person, we talked about books. And you said that you were not the speaker, because I said, I'm a writer, Grant. I said, I'm a writer and I want to, speak. And you were like, nah, at that point, you hadn't written The Successful Speaker yet, or you hadn't, worked to get that book out.
Right.
What for you, like, made the shift where you're like, okay, all right, after all these years, I need to write a book?
Yeah, so I would echo that. Like, writing a book, I can recognize the value of it. I understand that it could certainly move the needle. It just wasn't really high on my priority list. There's plenty of things that you can do in a business to grow a business, whether that's as a speaker or as an entrepreneur in any way. And that having a book is one way to do that, but there's also dozens of other ways. So it's not that I didn't want to write a book. Personally, I just don't really enjoy writing. It's not my favorite thing. I don't feel like I'm great at it. And that's where I tend to default to things like speaking or doing podcasting or things like that, where I know that I feel more comfortable. I know that I can do a good job there. So at the time I had a friend of mine, Jeff Goins, who is a very prolific writer. He's a very successful author, knows a lot about the publishing space. And he had asked if I had any interest in writing a book. And I said, I get it, but it's not real high on the priority list. And he said, well, I got an idea. Like, what if I wrote the book for you? You already have all this IP, this knowledge, this content, these case studies, this success stories. He said, you already have all of this. What if I take all that, and I'm kind of the ghostwriter, and I'm going to pull it all together and turn it into book format? And he was right. Like, we had all the content, but turning it into a book and making it into a really, really solid resource is it's a different skill set that I didn't feel like I had. And so, ultimately, that's what we ended up doing. Is we worked with Jeff, and he took all of our ideas and our systems and our processes and the students that we worked with, and on and on and on, and he turned it into book format. So it was a really, really good collaboration, which I also think is important for any entrepreneur to look at. Is you don't have to be the expert at everything, right? I know you and I've been geeking out on like the Last Dance series with Jordan and all that, and so you're going to have different people who serve different purposes on a team. And so you may have one player who's like Rodman's job is just to rebound. He's not there to score. He's just there to rebound. And so I kind of view that, like, for me, like, I'm good at this thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm good at a different thing. So who do I partner up with, or who can I work with that is good at that side of things? So I knew for writing, publishing, books, that Jeff was really, really good at that. So it was a really good fit to work together with him on that.
Yeah, shout out to Jeff Goins. And like I always say, I name drop if it's good. And Jeff Goins is a solid guy. Yeah. And Grant, a lot of people, man, they don't know how I guess booming your speaking career was. Like, how you were on the road and like you had everything at a point, and I remember like you were booking all these dates, all the stuff that we think, right? When we get into this is what we want.
Right.
Kind of talk about how that happened, how you did everything that the speaker was supposed to do on stage, but then you're like, okay, I've got to shift things a little bit. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, when I got started, my background was I was a youth pastor for a little while, enjoyed speaking, enjoyed working with students. And so, saw a couple speakers and met a couple speakers who were doing it full time. And I was like, I want to do that, and started, just kind of like stalking them and trying to figure out anything I possibly could. And eventually started booking some gigs. And I think that's really important. Like every speaker, any speaker you look up to, you admire, you respect, everybody starts from zero. There was a point where you and I had none gigs, and then we did our first gig, and then we did a second gig. And every speaker is the exact same way. And so don't look at some speaker who you may feel like is a long ways ahead of you, like, well, I can never get there. Well, you can't compare where they are today to where they were when they got started or where you are right now. That's not fair to anybody. So realize that, I got started the same way everybody else does. I did my first gig, did some more gigs, and eventually got to a point where I was doing around 60 or 70 gigs a year. And it was great. Like business was great and was booking a lot of gigs, was really enjoying doing it. As you well know, like there's nothing that compares to like being on a stage in front of a live audience. Like it's legit, right? But I remember I remember a speaker friend telling me early on, he said, speaking is a high paying manual labor job, and that we get paid really well to stand on stage and talk. But the nature of speaking is, in order to increase your income or increase your impact, you have to do one of two things. Either you have to charge more, and in the industry that I was in the education space, I was on the upper end of what I felt comfortable charging. I wasn't really interested in going to a different market and doing more like corporate stuff or anything like that at the time. And he said, so you either charge more or you just do more gigs. And there's no speaker who wants to or can do 365 dates a year. Like that's just not healthy or sustainable. And so it got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm doing 70, I'm gone 80, 90 nights a year. Business is really good. And so I'm kind of, I don't know, in some ways almost felt like I don't know if bored is the right word, but I was like kind of looking for a new challenge. And and I talk about this in the book, but I had a speaker mentor who told me, he said, you want to regularly find things where the challenge exceeds the skill set, where the challenge exceeds the skill set. What he meant by that was, like when you and I first stood on stage to speak to an audience, Odell, like you just feel like you're just way in over your head. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Why am I here? Why did they hire me? Why is this audience listening to me? I got nothing to say. And the challenge way exceeds the skill set. But what happens is over time is it flips and the skill set exceeds the challenge. So right now, you and I could stand in front of an audience of 1,000 students and we could crush it and be on autopilot, right? So that's not fair to the student. That's not fair for us. And so you feel like the skill set is exceeding the challenge. And so you want to regularly find situations and set yourself up where you are slightly over your head, but in a healthy way. And so at the time, I had a lot of people who were asking me like, "Hey, I want to be a speaker," and I love being a speaker, but I love being an entrepreneur. And so speaking was just a methodology of being able to be an entrepreneur. And so at that point, we started to transition to do more of the teaching and coaching of what it is that we do now. I still love speaking, still do some speaking, but I love what we are able to do now and help serve and support speakers.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, Grant, you were one of the first speakers that I looked at and I said, okay, if that's going to be my second three-peat, right? Like you said, that challenge, with Jordan, I'm using the last dance. That first three-peat, he was like, you know what, Phil, what challenges you got? You ain't got nothing else for me, so I'm gonna go play baseball. But I looked at you and I said, man, I remember, because we're in some speaking groups on online. I was like, man, I remember when Grant went here and then he went there. I want to do something like that. Yeah. And for a second, I want to flip it a little bit because you've been in the speaking space for years. I'm coming up on, this is my 7th year full-time speaking. For the new speaker, the brand new speaker that decides to do what you suggest, they say, okay, I'm gonna go look up Odell, I'm gonna go look up Arel Moody, I'm gonna go look up Kyle Sheely, I'm gonna go look up all these people, and then they're like, wow, I didn't know it was all these speakers. Can you talk about, is the speaking market too crowded?
Nah, not at all. Like there is no shortage of opportunities and events that exist in the world. And obviously, like right now at the time we're talking, the world's different, the world's weird. But one thing I remind our speakers all the time is like we will get back to normal, right? So hopefully it'll happen sooner rather than later. But the speaking industry is one that has been around literally for generations and generations. It will continue to be around long after a pandemic. It has survived recessions and depressions and wars and 9/11. The speaking industry is going to be just fine, and there's plenty of space, because the truth is, again, like we were saying, the nature of speaking is that you are one person speaking to one audience at one time, and there's no one speaker that can speak to everybody. You can't do 365 days a year, and even if you did, that's a fraction within a fraction within a fraction of the opportunities that exist. So there is absolutely no shortage of opportunities that exist for speakers. And one of the unique things about being speakers is because no one can speak at everything, is it also creates a lot of camaraderie. Like as you know, the way that you get a lot of gigs is oftentimes from other speakers that you've built relationships with. You're referring things, because I know, like, if I go do a great job at an event one year, they're probably not going to have me back for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And so I want to maintain that relationship with them. So I may say, hey, you got to go talk to Odell. He'd do a great job for you. And you may do the same for me, or we may recommend Arel or Kyle or whoever, because we know that it's not a zero-sum game. Like, if you do a gig, that doesn't mean like I can't ever do that gig. I remember that early on in my career, I was like, if I was going up for a big gig with a couple other speakers and I didn't get it, I was like, dang, why'd they pick Odell? They didn't pick me. I'd be super bummed about it. But then I was like, okay, but the odds are, if they have you speak this year, they're probably not going to have you speak next year. So that's just one fewer, one less speaker that I got to be in competition with next year, right? So it gave me just like having a long-term perspective on this is just so important. And so again, whether you're looking at again yourself or Kyle or Arel or whoever, there's so many great speakers out there. But at the same time, there's always new speakers who are getting started. And again, like any one of us, like we all started from scratch. Every one of us started from zero. So there's no reason why you can't do the same.
And I love what you do with the Speaker Lab. You got the podcast. You literally, if somebody, maybe if they didn't have the money to invest in one of your higher coaching programs or anything like that, you have different levels for people to come in. And the Speaker Lab podcast, like somebody could literally listen and study those podcasts and be off to a fast start.
Totally.
And one thing that you all are doing now is really focusing on virtual programs. And because we got to, pivot, we got to tweak a little bit. We have to dress up. We got to use things like StreamYard. We got to do a little different. Right. For the speaker that's like, all right, Grant, I was like getting some stuff going. Then I got some stuff canceled. Mm-hmm. What are a couple of things that you all in the Speaker Lab doing specifically that are helping speakers book virtual events?
Yeah. So for sure, like we were saying, like everything is a little weird right now. One thing I'd remind speakers of is, again, this will pass. We've also noticed that events are still booking speakers. So even though we have no idea, is this going to be the type of thing that lasts, a few weeks or a few months or a few years? Nobody has any clue. But one of the things I've seen is that a lot of events are still booking speakers, because the reality of an event is, if you have an event that is, 3 to 6 months, let's say 6 months out or 9 months or 12 months out, you can't wait until like the week before, like, all right, looks like we're going to do it. So I guess we got to figure out our speaker. So if you have an event that is, 6 months from now or happening in the fall or early next year, a lot of them are still booking speakers because they can't wait until the last minute to sort that out. So for speakers, though, I would highly recommend that although things will go back to normal, it could take a second to get there. You don't want to just twiddle your thumbs. You don't want to just sit on the sideline and be like, all right, I'll just sit and wait and hopefully things come back to normal. Like, this is a good opportunity to pivot and figure out, okay, what do I need to be doing right now? And so virtual is a option. It's not the only option, but it is a option of a way that you can continue to deliver a message and help audiences in a way that doesn't depend on you having to get on a plane. So one of the unique things right now is, because people can't meet together, it doesn't mean that the audience that you're supposed to be speaking to, that their problem has suddenly been solved. This is something we've been talking a lot about with speakers, is that as speakers, we are in the problem solving business. So when you are hired to go speak at something, you are there to solve some type of problem. And just because that event isn't happening now, whether it's been postponed or canceled or delayed or rescheduled or whatever, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden that problem has magically disappeared. So they're still looking for a solution. And so virtual is a option of how you could deliver that solution to that audience. money. So absolutely, like virtual is something that is definitely worth paying attention to. It's going to look a little bit different in different industries, but I'm seeing a lot of speakers right now who are doing a lot of virtual gigs, and there's certainly a lot of upside to virtual gigs. Like it requires a lot less planning, a lot less lead time. It can be a little bit simpler for a speaker in that, you may do a presentation for hundreds or thousands of people all over the world, and you may never leave your house, right? Which that's the downside, the non-glamorous, non-sexy part of speaking, is that we got to get on a plane, we got to go somewhere, we got to leave our families. Versus with virtual, you can do. I had a speaker buddy yesterday. He did 3 virtual gigs yesterday. He didn't leave his house. So that's not too shabby. You can't, I don't know that I've never done a 3-peat in one day. I've done 2 different clients in the same day, but 3 would be hard to logistically pull off, but you can do that with virtual. That is a little more challenging with in-person events.
Yeah, that, and I hope that people were paying attention to what you said, that we still have problems to solve.
Yeah, totally.
We have problems to solve. People are still, and I'm connected with some grant funded organizations. They have to spend their money. Like they still have to spend their money. And I want to pull from the book a little bit for those of you. I want you to because there are not a lot of speaker books out there. I know that that's something that y'all kind of saw, that like there are not a lot of speaker books there, but you talk about 5 steps to booking gigs. And what I love is that in any business, the SPEAK acronym can work in some different ways. Totally. And so I want to focus just on the S, which is select a problem to solve.
Yeah.
And if you want to know more about that, make sure you check out the book. But Grant, and here's for new speakers, right? They're coming in, they're like, okay, I got it. I've been cyber stalking these speakers. I can see what they talk about. Yeah. Tony Robbins is my favorite speaker and all this stuff. And they're kind of looking at it from this big wide lens. And sometimes it's difficult to like hone in on a problem to solve. Could you give just a couple of examples of, like, if you're a new speaker and you're trying to solve a problem, how do you identify that problem?
Yeah, most of the time, there's 2 sides to the equation. Who do you speak to, and what's the problem that you solve? And most speakers are clear on one side, but not the other. I'm clear on this is who I want to speak to. I don't really know what I want to speak about, or I know I want to speak about this, but I don't know who that's a good fit for. The danger is, and we see this all the time with speakers, is we just like speaking. You and I, we love being on the stage. And so who do we speak to? What do we speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? I just want to speak, man. Like, doesn't matter. Just let me speak. But that's what happens is we spread this net far and wide, and we think, well, I can speak to anybody about anything. And the reality is that you can't. You have to be narrow. You have to be clear. You have to be focused. So the analogy we use all the time is that you have to be the steakhouse and not the buffet. The steakhouse and not the buffet, meaning that, Odell, if you and I were looking for a good steak, we could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 different things that they offer, and they're all mediocre. Or we could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really, really, really well. So they're not trying to do all these other things that they're mediocre at, but they do, no, I do steak. And so same thing for speakers is saying, listen, I speak to college students on helping them figure out what they want to do in terms of a career, or I speak to high school teachers about helping them better engage their students in the classroom, or I help, accountants pick up more clients through social media marketing, whatever, right? It's just like being clear on this is what I do versus like, yeah, I do this, I do a little bit of that, I do a little bit of that. And again, like you were saying, this isn't exclusive to just speakers. This is so many different entrepreneurs who are like, I do all these different things and I'm mediocre at all of them. I wear all these different hats. I'll give you an example. We had, when the book first came out, we had someone who reached out to us and said, man, I love the book. You have the speaker lab. You should create the author lab, right? Because people who are interested in speaking are also interested in writing books. And on one hand, you're like, yeah, that's not too far of a leap. That makes sense. But I don't want to become a buffet. I want to say, no, we do this. We do one thing and we're really, really, really good at that thing. And even though there's all these other tangential things that we could do, we say, no, we stay in our lane and we do this and we're really good at that. Because by doing that, it actually makes it easier for the right type of people to find you versus like saying, no, like nobody's excited to go to a buffet. Nobody's like, man, we should really go to Golden Corral tonight. Like nobody's like, I'm craving tacos. I think Golden Corral is the place for me. Like nobody's thinking that, right? And so instead we say, no, I do this. I do one specific thing and I do that one thing really, really well. And so again, by doing that, it actually makes it easier to be able to find and book gigs.
Yeah, and that's hilarious. My mom, shout out to my mom. She loves Golden Corral, but she loves them for a specific reason. Like they have one thing that she likes.
Yeah.
Loves those yeast rolls, man. Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Come on now.
I want to go to Golden Corral for that thing. So
Yep.
even the buffet has different things that you like. I think that's a big deal for a lot of speakers.
Right.
And I think a part of that, Grant, comes from a scarcity mentality. Like they feel like, man, if I just say I talk to student leaders about how to lead their organization better, if I just say that, then I'm leaving out diversity. I'm leaving out new students. I'm leaving all these other, but really, like you said, it makes it easier to recommend. And I had a question. I don't normally do this, but I like this question by Nick DiStefano. He said that knowing camaraderie and networking helps us. How can new speakers better support each other and connect? So let's play that out. Like if we're brand new, like, oh, I'm just starting out the speaking thing. Hey, Grant, how are you, my friend?
Yeah.
I want to be a speaker too. Like, how could we help each other?
Yeah, good question. So one of the things that you do not want to do is, especially like when you're brand new, is just like harass or stalk a bunch of speakers. So like part of the reason I started the Speak Aloud podcast in the first place is we had a lot of people who were email and ask us questions, same questions that you get, about how do I figure out who I speak to, how do I find gigs, what goes on my website, demo videos, speaking fees, all those sort of things. And so it's one thing to like, hey, here's an answer in an email. It's another thing to say, hey, we did a 30-minute podcast episode just on speaking fees. So go check that out. And so whenever you are asking a bunch of questions on like stuff that's already available and out there, then like you're really missing the boat there. I think one of the best things you can do though, I know for me, the people that really are like newer or up and coming or whatever, the people that I respect or pay attention to are the people who are doing something, right? So if it's just like, man, I'm interested in being a speaker, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not taking any action. Like, again, plenty of resources. Go pick up a $15 book that will help you out and tell you what you need to know. But the people who are like, hey, I've been grinding, I've been doing the work, I've been putting it in, I've been implementing it, I've been seeing results and building momentum. Like I got nothing but respect for that, because I know that you can do this, but it's not easy. So the speakers that are doing it, who are taking action, that I know if they ask me a question and I give them my advice, that they're going to do something with it. Like those are the speakers I want to help. Right. And so absolutely, I think one of the best things you can do is take action, and people notice that. I remember when I got started speaking that I was just like, I'd head down, just booking gigs, just doing whatever I could to book gigs. And there's several speakers in the industry that I knew of, that I admired and respected. And I remember a couple of speakers saying like, I remember one particular one where I got booked to speak at an event. There was another speaker there I looked up to, and they said, I keep seeing your name all over the place, and like, I want to hear what you're doing. Right. And so I knew that all of a sudden it wasn't like this, mentor mentee type thing, but they viewed me as a peer because I was busting my butt. Like I was booking gigs versus just kind of like sitting and waiting and asking their advice and then telling me something and me not doing anything with it. So I think one of the best things you can do that just shows people you're serious is like, just do the work and like take action on it. Cause other speakers notice that. And again, I think that there's, I think it's one of the unique things about speaking is that it's not this zero-sum game where it's like, oh man, this is my gig, therefore you can never do this. Because again, like most speakers are very generous and helpful. I know for me, when I got started, I was peppering people as well, asking questions and doing whatever I could doing whatever I could to like just find out anything to get going and get started. I found that most speakers are pretty helpful, but I also found that again, most speakers get a lot of questions, and most aspiring speakers who get those answers don't do anything with it. And so if you're asking for feedback and you're getting feedback, like do something with that. Like that definitely get you on people's radars.
For sure. And that is a huge component when you talked about mentor and mentee, seeing other speakers that are doing well, wondering what they're doing. A lot of them are doing a lot of the same things. They've just been doing them longer.
Yeah.
So that's a part of it. But also, I want to talk about coaching, because when you and I got to meet, it was because I went to Jeff Goins' live event.
Yeah.
And I've been following Jeff for a while. And I was like, man, I bought a couple of his books. And I said, man, this dude, I want to, I can get a chance to actually meet him.
Yeah.
That's great. And I got the VIP upgrade and all that different stuff. And one of the things I learned there was that, when you pay, you kind of shorten that time.
Totally.
All the stuff you're talking about, yeah, you can go to the Speaker Lab and listen to all of the episodes. That's going to take you a considerable amount of time. Or you could pay some money. And so I want you to talk about, because obviously I want to be sensitive to, if you don't have the money, obviously, especially what's going on right now, but talk about the importance and the value of investing in a coach.
Yeah, so you're exactly right that whenever someone's getting started, part of what I try to think about whenever we're creating resources at the Speaker Lab is, what do I wish I had when I got started? And at the time, like, there was no speaking podcast out there when I was getting going, but man, I would have loved something like that. We're at the time of this recording, we're coming up on 300 episodes that we've done. And so that's hundreds of hours worth of content that are just free, no strings attached. There's plenty of info. Like you said earlier, you could take everything, you can go listen to every single episode. It'll take you a second, but go listen to every single episode, apply and implement what we talk about there. And you can do this, right? You don't have to pay a dime to myself or anything that we do at the Speaker Lab. Again, like, it took hours and hours and hours, like hundreds of hours, to create a book. And you can go pick it up for like $15 or something on Amazon right now. It's going to give you exactly what you need to do. But again, if you want like more step-by-step coaching and help and customized help, then yeah, at the Speaker Lab, we do have a couple different programs and options of what that looks like, myself and our coaches and our team. Because there's certainly people who are like, I want to get results. I want to, listen to the podcast, or I want to go through the book, but I want to get those results quicker. And so that's really what we do. And again, you can go both routes. Oftentimes if you go kind of the podcast route, or even if you go the book route, the challenge is, people oftentimes wonder, like, okay, but how does this apply to me? I get the concept, I get the idea, but I'm trying to think through, like, in my scenario with what I want to do, should I go path A or should I go path B? And having that outside voice to say, hey, okay, based on my experience, based on what you're trying to do, here's what I would recommend that you do. Sometimes having that coach can absolutely accelerate your results and the progress that you're trying to make in your speaking business. So yeah, that's what we do at the Speaker Lab.
Yeah, and I just want to suggest again, because I was in booked and paid to speak, like earlier iteration of the Speaker Lab, and I was already doing some speaking. So if you're listening to this or you're watching this, you're like, well, I'm already a speaker, but it's still worth taking a look at it. We should always be continually investing in our businesses. And before we get you out of here, Grant, I want to ask you, like, in your mentorship hierarchy, and it could be a speaker, it could be an entrepreneur, it could be whoever, who are one or two people that you look at where you are now, and it's like, if it hadn't have been for that person or that person, I would not be here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things that's always been helpful for me is try to pay attention to people who are like a step or two ahead and are doing something similar to what I want to do and doing it in a way that I want to do it. And so when I think about, because I think sometimes, like, the mistake is that we look to people who are like light years ahead of us. So if we said, like, okay, I want to be I'm brand new to speaking, I want to be a speaker, so let's see what Tony Robbins is up to. What's Tony? He's a speaker. What's he up to these days? Well, like, that's totally different league. Like, it's not even comparable, right? So it's not a good example to say, like, okay, Tony's selling out stadiums, so I guess I'll sell out stadiums. It's like, it doesn't work like that. So I want to look for people who are maybe a step or two ahead. And so, like, early on, there was a guy I worked for in college that most people wouldn't even know of, that he was doing a bunch of speaking, like, especially in the church space. And so I got to help him a little bit behind the scenes. And that was like one of my first tastes of, like, oh, this is a thing. Like, you can actually make a career doing this. Like, that was incredibly instrumental and helpful for me. Josh Shipp was incredibly helpful for me early on, and still someone I have massive admiration and respect for today. He's someone who's been, especially in the youth industry, has been around for a long time, just an OG in the world. Someone like Phil Boyd has been really, really helpful for me. And in fact, we talk about him in the book. Some of the challenge and skill set idea we talked about earlier was something I learned from Phil. Harriet Turk is another good friend that I have a lot of respect for in the speaking industry. So there's plenty of speakers out there. And one of the great things about speaking is there's no right or wrong amount to do it or what it looks like, right? There's speakers that we both know who do 50, 75, 100 gigs a year. And like, that's all they do. That's what they want to do. And some that are like, they do 5 gigs or 10 gigs and they do some coaching, or they do a consulting, or they have a book, or they do more like a small in-person in-person workshops. I'm like, it all works. It's all effective. You just got to figure out what makes sense for you, and then look for maybe a couple models or examples of who's doing something like that makes sense, that resonates with that, and has some type of path that maybe you could follow to do something similar.
For sure. You have been listening to the wisdom, to the knowledge of the one and only. I call him Grant the GOAT. Grant the GOAT.
I don't know about that. It may be a bit of a stretch, but I appreciate it.
But make sure you check out the Speaker Lab. Grant's been doing this great work for a long time, and it's worth the listen to the podcast, to get the book. The book is going to be a blessing to your business. And Grant, thank you for leading the way for speakers like me and entrepreneurs like me that are looking to move into the space. And y'all know how we do, everybody. We will see y'all at the top, not from the top. God bless. Take care.
Thanks, man.